This is topic 4.2 and 4.3 for AP Environmental Science about soil. All right, so the first thing to learn about here is the formation of soil, and we're going to start with the rock cycle. So soil is formed really from the erosion of rocks and then a whole bunch of organic living things like bacteria and fungus and worms and things like that. Now, but first we got to start learning about rock. And there's just a few real basic things to know about rock. First of all, the source of all rock is hardened magma. And so igneous rock is hardened magma. We have a couple of types that we learned about in the last topic. Basalt is the main type of oceanic crust, and granite is the main type in continental crust. And as these things break down through weathering, sand forms. And then sedimentary rock form when sand and little pieces of rocks, which we call sediments, they're compressed by overlying sediments over a long period of time. So we're talking thousands of years. They're pressed down and form into a rock. So these layers are pressed down. And then metamorphic rock is when sedimentary rock or igneous rock or other sedimentary rock or metamorphic rocks, high temperatures and pressure turn them into metamorphic rock. And so here's some of our examples. We have like obsidian and pumice stones that people use to soften their feet. Our igneous rock. Granite is also igneous. A lot of people don't think that, but it is. Sedimentary, some of our main types are sandstone and shale and limestone. Metamorphic is marble, slate, very hard rocks. Now, all of them can turn into each other. And so they can constantly be reformed or changed through heat and pressure and melting into the other. So it's not a circular cycle. Igneous can turn into either metamorphic or sedimentary. All of them can melt back into the magma and then be turned into igneous rock. So they can all turn into each other. All right, so now that we've learned a little bit about the rock cycle, let's talk about rocks being weathered. So the first part of soil formation is the weathering of rock. We have three types. Physical weathering is mechanical breakdown that's caused usually by water or wind or freezing. Usually the freeze and thaw cycles will break down rock. Chemical weathering, we have natural chemicals in the world. We have acidic plants, we have acidic other rocks. But then humans can also cause more chemical weathering through acid rain, which we will talk about in Unit 7. Then we have biological weathering. We can see here we have tree roots breaking apart rocks. We have lichen and moss can slowly break apart rocks. And erosion is a term that you need to know. It's the physical removal of rock fragments, and it can also be soil. There's soil erosion as well. From a landscape, from an ecosystem, this can break down land. Now, this can happen naturally. It can also happen through human cause, through deforestation, which is cutting down trees and not planting them back. Overgrazing is when you have too much cattle eating the grass and it pulls out the roots. See, plants hold soil in place. So you always want to make sure you have plants in your yards or places because they hold the soil. So if you have too much cattle ripping out the grass and eating it and it's not holding that soil in place, you can have erosion. Unmanaged construction. So if you are doing construction, you're moving loose dirt around, there's a lot of regulations to prevent it from being blown or washed away in rain. All right, going on. Now, soil is super important, provides many ecosystem services that are beneficial to humans, including it filters water, it grows our plants that we need to survive. Habitat for organisms is not an ecosystem service unless those organisms then are used by humans in some ways, like pollination or people that hunt and eat the meat from the animals. It also will break down organic matter, recycle nutrients, the decomposers, the things like that. So if soil benefits humans directly or indirectly, we call them ecosystem services. Okay, so there's lots of different ways that soil is formed. We talk about soil here, it's super important. Providing ecosystem services. Let's go on. All right, so soils take hundreds of thousands of years to form. They say, now soil is a renewable resource, but it takes about 100 years to form an inch of soil, so it's a slow renewable resource. You have to have chemical, physical, biological weathering of rocks and a gradual accumulation of decayed organic matter, which we call detritus. For detritivores are decomposing animals. They eat apart detritus, dead stuff, basically. Okay, so we want to know what the parent material is, what rock is being weathered, how long does this soil take to form. Climate is a factor. If you're in a warmer and wetter environment, you have more decomposition and you have faster soil formation. If you're in a flat area, you're not going to have as much eroded, so you're going to have soil that builds up faster. And if you got healthy amounts of organisms like detritivores and microbes and fungus, they're going to decompose things faster and build up soil faster. So these are all factors that are impacted with soil formation. Okay, so we have here parent rock is being broken down. As it's being broken down, you have organic minerals, accumulates, plants and other organisms that are growing here in this tiny amount of soil, died or decomposed, and then you have deeper and deeper soil, mature soil. So soil formation takes time. Okay, the next thing you need to know is you have different horizons of soil. Let me go to the next slide and then come back. So here's our soil horizons, and you can see the top here is organic matter. This is basically dead stuff, twigs and leaves and bugs and whatever is at the top here, decomposing. Below that, the A horizon is our topsoil. This is the most important for growing our crops and our food and most plants. Beneath that plant is called the E, and then B is called the subsoil, where you accumulate metals and nutrients, because nutrients in the rain, they leach down into the others. And then you've got C is our subsoil. It's least weathered, similar to parent material. For my test and the AP test, you need to know O, A, B, C. You don't have to know E. So just remember O, A, B, C, but you do need to know what these things are, not just memorize O, A, B, C. All right, so let's go back up to the previous slide. Okay, so we've got O horizon. It has organic detritus, which means dead stuff in various stages of decomposing. This is leaves, all that leaf litter that falls off of trees, deciduous trees, broken branches, dead trees, dead plants, dead bugs, dead animals, dead fungus, living fungus. The bottom layer is, it's called humus, that is decomposed dead stuff, like mature compost is what we call humus. Spelled differently than hummus. Hummus stuff is that yummy stuff you eat, that Mediterranean dip made out of garbanzo beans or chickpeas. Spelled differently with 2 M's. The stuff you eat has 2 M's. This stuff is 1 M here. It's basically mature compost or stuff that has been decomposed and ready to grow and be part of the A horizon, which is your topsoil. And so this is where you should have lovely, rich soil ready to grow plants. The E horizon, you don't have to know for my test or the AP test. You do need to know, however, the B horizon, known as subsoil, and the C horizon is very similar to parent material, least weathered, lots of rocky material in the C horizon. And again, here's our picture of those horizons. Make sure you know them, what happens at each one except for E. All right, so soil erosion is a big deal. Soil erodes from the contact with wind and water and increases in human activity. Erosion occurs when topsoil is disturbed, when we plow the soil, when we cut down trees and don't water them, and don't plant them back. Things erode. And so our topsoil can get lost, which is not a good thing for humans. So most of erosion is caused from water, but some of it's caused by wind, and a lot of it can be caused by wind. Big occurrences like the Dust Bowl in the 1930s that you learn about in your U.S. history classes. All right, going on, we need to know that soils have different physical properties, chemical properties, biological properties that affect its productivity. So productivity is the amount of biomass available that's made by photosynthesizers, producers, available for your consumers, including us. So basically, how good is your soil to grow food for humans, to grow plants, to grow ecosystems, etc. So if you go to college and you become a soil engineer, and that's like a really good field to grow into. You may have not even heard of such a thing as a soil engineer. A lot of times they're civil engineers. They have to know about soil. Some soils are really good for growing crops. Some are better for building things on. How much productivity a soil is, it depends on a lot of factors that we're going to learn about in just a second. We have three main types of soil particles. You can see by the picture there, we have sand, silt, and clay. Clay is the smallest particle. I have a mistake here. Let me fix this. The smallest is clay. The largest is sand. You're like, well, clay looks big. Well, clay clumps, but if you take apart all those clumps into particle sizes, it's actually the smallest particle. The differences in size determine how much air is between the particles of soil, and we call that porosity. It's basically the pore size in between the particles of soil. All right, going on. So we have our different particles of soil, and there's different tests where you can figure out the percentage of sand, silt, and clay. And you'll do a lab where you'll figure this stuff out, and you're going to practice using the soil triangle. So basically, if you figure out, for example, you have 40% sand in your soil sample, because all samples are different. Your soil in your yard is different than the soil down the street. Well, not always, but oftentimes. But soils can be all different compositions. We call it soil texture. So the amount of sand, silt, and clay is the soil texture. And so if we have, for example, 40% sand, 40% silt, 20% clay, we can do sand down here, 40% we find here. Then silt we find up here at 40%. And clay we find here, and we find them all where they meet in the middle, and that is loam, which is kind of the perfect soil. So loam soil is perfect soil. Another physical property is called water holding capacity. It's the amount of water that the soil can hold against gravity draining. Permeability is how fast it moves through that soil. If you add sand, so sand right here improves the permeability, the drainage rate. So if you've got soil is not draining too much, add a little sand. Don't add too much, because sometimes it can compact and create like really cemented stuff in a garden. So be careful with that. People who do this, like to grow crops, farmers, they go to school to learn this stuff, to universities. So anyway, you do need to know, however, that increasing sand will increase the permeability, the drainage rate, how fast the water drains. And clay doesn't. So that's why they make pots out of clay, because clay doesn't like to drain soil. Okay, now you don't want it too high and you don't want it too low. So too high, if your water drains too fast, the plants can't absorb. So the plants can't absorb enough water before it drains. However, if the permeability is too low, the plants can suffer from root rot. So that's when there's too much water in the soil and the microbes start to decompose the roots. So we call this root rot. And so that is not good as well. It's one of the reasons why if you have a potted plant at home, you have to have holes in the bottom to drain the water out. or you can water it too much and the roots can rot inside the pot. Okay, so we can see here that some soils have higher permeability than others. So sand will drain the fastest, silt will drain second fastest, and clay will drain, well, mostly doesn't hardly drain at all. Now, this is not like perfect soil. This is just the components. Sand drains the fastest, then silt, then clay. If you've got loam, it's going to drain probably the fastest of them all. All right, we need to know also the chemical properties of soil. There is something called cation exchange capacity. So the ability of a particular soil to absorb and release cations. Cations is something you learned in chemistry class. It is not something you need to know for our class or the AP test, which is why it's not on your study guide. But you do need to know nutrients, and we're going to get to those in a second. In essential, you need to know the 3 macro or main nutrients: nitrogen, N; phosphorus, P; potassium, K. Calcium would be considered a minor, or it's not minor, a micro nutrient, which is important, but it does not, plants don't need it in the same quantity. You also, you don't have to know base saturation, but it is another chemical property of soil. You also need to understand that soils are made out of a lot of biological critters, fungi, which you think of mushrooms when we think of fungus or fungi, but really most of fungi lives underground. We call them mycelial fungi. Lots of bacteria, lots of protozoans, and then you want all of those things in your soil. The more biologically active your soil is, the healthier it is, and the better your plants are. You also want earthworms to create holes in the soil for water to come through. Now, things like moles and rats are pests, but they can help mix the soil. Snails and slugs, they are not good for plants you want, but for consuming dead plant material and recycling nutrients, they are important. So we want a healthy soil that has all of these things. Moles actually are fine. Gophers eat your plants, but not moles too much. Actually, I don't know that much about moles because we don't really have them in my neck of the woods. We have more problems with gophers and rats. Okay, so there are 3 main tests. You need to know about nitrogen. What nitrogen's important for is green leafy growth. You need to know phosphorus is important for photosynthesis, for root growth, winter hardiness. Potassium promotes healthy flower and fruits, helps move water through, and let me change my spelling, through the plants. You also need to know what inorganic fertilizer, so inorganic or synthetic, that basically means human-made. So nitrogen can be made artificially through the Haber-Bosch process. We learned that in Unit 1. They are often cheaper and easier to obtain than natural fertilizers, but they cause eutrophication on a larger scale. They run off of land more easily, and they cause more eutrophication. Now, organic fertilizers are ones made from natural sources like animal manure or compost or green manure. Animal manure is animal poop that has had some heat to kill off microbes, and it's partially decomposed, and then you can see spraying it on the field. I know it seems gross, but that's natural. Compost is decomposed plant matter. Green manure is very similar to compost. So fertilizers in drinking water, nitrates in drinking water can cause blue baby syndrome, where babies and small children cannot get enough oxygen to the cells. Phosphates in drinking water can cause cancer, so we don't want our fertilizer in our drinking water. Okay, why do we need to know soil pH? Well, plants have a range of tolerance for pH. It affects the nutrient uptake by plants. So if it's at the wrong pH, the plants cannot absorb nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So in my community where I live, our natural soils are about an 8, which is a little bit high. And so when I have my vegetable garden, I add elemental sulfur and it lowers it to about a 6 or a 6.5. And my plants grow much better that way because they can absorb the nutrients that I give them through fertilizer. Okay, if you want to raise the pH of your soil, if you have too acidic soil, most of the eastern United States, their soil is a little bit acidic. You can add calcium carbonate. Now this is what I do. I lower the pH in my soil, which I buy elemental sulfur at the garden store and mix it in my soil. And then I water it in, which lowers the pH from about 8 to about 6.5. Okay, so you do need to know the pH scale. A lot of time, I put this slide in because kids get things confused all the time. Students often think that pH equals acidity. Oh, you increase the pH, that means you increase the acid. It's the opposite. Increasing the pH on the pH scale decreases acidity. Now you know that when you think it out, but in the heat, the pressure and stress of taking tests, kids mix those up all the time. So whenever you see a pH question, just stop for a minute because you know this and just think, okay? So decreasing pH increases the acidity. As you go down on the pH scale, you get more and more and more acidic. A couple of little things about the pH scale and soil. Soils that are formed over volcanic or igneous rock is more acidic, so it's lower on the pH scale. Soils that form over limestone and sedimentary rock have more buffering to prevent pH change due to the presence of calcium carbonate. So these are two little tidbits about soil pH that you need to know. All right, so that is it for section 4.2 and 4.3.